We're out here protesting the mandate that Boeing has put upon us. And today we have a guest speaker, constitutionalist, Earl Taylor. He teaches Constitution and learn a little bit more about our rights and what they can and can't do to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody. What a great pleasure it is to be with you here today. As Mark said, I love the Constitution, been teaching it around the country for 35 years, and in the tradition of the Founding Fathers. We've got to make that clear, right? Not in the tradition of law schools today or the Supreme Court. I just want to review with you a few things, a little bit of the Declaration of Independence and then in the Constitution. I'm going to quote from you something you probably all know because it's required memorization in Arizona for every 4th, 5th, and 6th grader. And it's the second paragraph of the Declaration. And it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now get this. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So you say to yourself, okay, why are governments instituted? To secure the God-given rights of the people, right? And so a principle of the founders says this: the proper role of government is to protect equal rights, not provide equal things. There are some people who say you can't have equal rights unless you have equal things. And that's their justification for government getting in.
Some people think you can't have equal rights unless you have equal things. But the founder said the proper role of government is to protect equal rights, not provide equal things. And these people who say the other way need to read the very next line of the Declaration of Independence. Governments are instituted to protect these rights. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Where does government get its authority? From the people. The founder said, in the people is the only place where government authority, the power to govern, originally rests. There is no innate power in government except what the people give it, right? And so the government actually becomes our agent. They work for us in protecting our rights. Everybody follow that? Then he says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, meaning what? Whenever the government begins to vary from protecting the rights of the people, in other words, when they begin to usurp other authority that they don't have, then what? Then it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, meaning the government. And of course, the founders didn't have a way to alter or abolish the government that they were under, and so they had to do what they had to do. But they've given us an amazing system where we can alter or abolish things that go awry. Are you ready for this? Every 2 years. You know what we can do every 2 years if we wanted to?
Vote them out.
We can change nearly every member of every state legislature in this nation. We can change the whole House of Representatives because they're only there for 2-year terms. We can change 1/3 the Senate. And every other 2-year period, we can do all that again. And the president. This is incredible power of the people. If we want to badly enough. That's the key, right? Jefferson says the only true corrective of constitutional abuses is education. So we must educate the people and then watch out. We call this system every 2 years peaceful self-repair. We can assemble like this, but we don't have to get violent. We don't have to destroy people. We don't have to hurt people. We don't have to destroy their property. No. Peaceful self-repair every 2 years. It's amazing. All this is in the Declaration of Independence. I want to go back and read something from the Constitution. And it's the very first sentence in this document after the preamble. This is Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1. Right? It's the very first sentence, and it says this. I'm sure you've all read this many times. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of the Senate and House of Representatives. Now, you and I have read that many times. That's pretty simple, isn't it? Let's take it apart a little bit and see what it really says. First of all, legislative. What does legislative mean? Legislative, what does that mean?
Make law.
Lawmaking. Lawmaking. All lawmaking powers, all federal lawmaking powers are where? In Congress, right? In other words, the people are saying, any legitimate law that comes out of Congress, we will obey. But what else are they saying by this? If anybody comes to us with a, quote, law, unquote, and expect us to obey it, and it is not gone through Congress, guess what?
Not law.
We are under no obligation.
Amen.
You know what this is saying? I have some bad news for you today. Do you realize that there are more laws coming out of Washington, laws that we are expected to obey that do not go through Congress than those that do? Very few laws are coming out of Congress. Most of them are coming out of the executive branch by executive orders, or the agencies in the executive branch by issuing rules and regulations, which is the very reason we're here, right? In violation of Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1. This is incredible. And if we just knew this would solve lots of problems, lots of issues. The only laws constitutionally we are obligated to obey are the laws passed by Congress. And who's in Congress? Who's in Congress? Our elected representatives, which we can choose every 2 years, which we can change every 2 years. And if our Constitution today is hanging by a single thread, perhaps that single thread is our right to vote. We need to clean that up too and make sure our right to vote is protected. All of them understand this? Any question about this? This is basic doctrine of the founders. I want to stress one other thing to you, and that is, if I have I'll just ask you this question. Do I have the right to stand in the doorway of my home with a loaded weapon day and night, if I want to protect my home? Have the right? I do. Do I have the right to stand out on my yard with my garden hose day and night, if I want to protect my home against fire? Is that right? Yeah. Do I want to do those things? No. And my neighbors kind of feel the same way. So what do? We go down the street to Joe. We say, Joe, how would you like to work for us? He says, well, doing what? Well, you know, we can do this day and night. That's a little inefficient. So we want to delegate to you the power that we have to protect our property. And we're going to buy you a car, and we're going to give you a badge to indicate the authority that you have. We're going to give you a gun and authorize you to use it, and just drive around our neighborhood and protect our property. He says, I think I could do that. We did the same thing with Sam. Buy him a big truck, put a big tank on it, big long hose, and if we call you, please hurry. What have we just created here, folks? We call it police and fire, but what is it really? One word starts with a G. Government. That's all government is. It's the delegation of authority from the people. Let me ask you this. What happens if the government does something that you as an individual don't have authority, and thereby were not able to delegate it to government? If you don't have the authority to do something, you cannot delegate that authority to government. You ever think of that? I'll just give you an example. Do I have the right to take money from Mark and give it to you? Do I have that right as an individual? What would that be? Stealing. Then how can I authorize my government to take money from you and give it to you? And you have to say, I can't. This is so basic. And yet, Americans do not understand this principle. And if the government does it anyway, that's what George Washington called usurpation. Don't let it happen. He was really strong on that in the farewell address. So let me ask you another question. Do I have the right as an individual to make you as an individual buckle up? No. Then how can I delegate that right or that authority to my agent, the government, to make you buckle up? Oh my gosh, and all of a sudden, we can go through so many different kinds of things. This is real freedom, folks. When you have freedom to do what you want to do unless you violate the rights of other people. That's freedom. And I tell my students, I say, I don't think you know that we don't really have that much freedom in this country. They look at me like we don't, and I explain them this stuff. We really don't have that much freedom. Anyway, let's talk about this, or let's think about this. Let's talk about this to our friends and our neighbors. If I don't have the right to require you to get a vaccination, then how can I delegate that right to my agent, the government, to make you do it? And the answer is I can. This is so basic. Anyway, I have copies of the Constitution. I'm sure you all have them, of course, being out here. But if anybody needs a copy of the Constitution to read, we can come by and get a copy of the Constitution. Thank you, Mark and Jesse, for letting me come. Thank you very much, Earl. It's a pleasure, and we appreciate him coming out and speaking to us. We are out here every day, Monday through Friday.
Questions.
Do you
Questions.
have time for some questions?
Oh, questions. Anybody have any questions?
Well, tell us more about the executive orders. How does that work? How have they been doing this for so many years?
Well, executive orders, of course. Executive orders are good in their places. In other words, the president could give an order, but to whom? To whom?
Military.
The people is
To the executive branch. He's their boss. There's a lot of people in that branch, right? A lot of agencies. He can give an order to them. And so at the beginning with Washington and Adams and Jefferson and so forth, they issued 20, 30, 40 executive orders to the executive branch. But can the president give an order that tells you what you can do, what you can eat, where your kids have to go to school, what kind of products you can buy, and all that? No! Those are federal laws. And if those are the kinds of things to which we are bound, it must go through Congress. Then comes along Theodore Roosevelt. Sometimes I want to blame everything on FDR, but this is Theodore, who said, I decline the view that all I can do is what I'm authorized to do in the Constitution. He says, I think I can do whatever I feel is necessary for the needs of the nation. And so he issued, during his 4 years in office, 1,006 executive orders, covering a multitude of situations that have affected your life and my life, completely outside the federal executive branch. That's executive orders. So they're not bad, but they have to be kept within their bounds, as most things are. Does that help, Jesse?
Why would the Congress not be mandated to get this vaccination? Why are they exempt from that?
Well, that's what my students ask. Well, Mr. Taylor, why don't we start doing things right? Well, because you have people in Congress who have taken an oath to support, protect, and defend the Constitution, who do not know the Constitution. They don't know it at all. Many of them are attorneys. When you go to law school and you take a course in constitutional law, you're given a law book for that course, and it's labeled Constitutional Law. You know what's in it? This thick court cases. Court cases, mostly by the Supreme Court, that have said what their interpretation of the Constitution is. Now, to be a successful lawyer, you have to know those today. But that's not Constitution. We've had lawyers take our class, and they come up to me and they say, Mr. Taylor, I've learned more about the Constitution just this day than I learned through all 3 years of law school. They do not study the Constitution in the tradition of the Founding Fathers. They study what the judges have said it is. Judge Hughes said years ago, we have a Constitution, but it's what we, the judges, say it is. That's the problem. And so those are the kind of people that we elect, because most people growing up in most schools, and definitely in most universities and colleges, do not understand and never have been taught the Constitution as the founders originally intended. And I'm here to say they had answers to every problem we have in America today. That's a big statement. And I challenge my students to give me an issue, and I can tell them how the founders would solve it. But we don't do that today. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the exemptions for the mandate?
What are my thoughts on exemptions for the mandate?
Yeah. Religious medical
Well,
exemptions.
You know, we need one big exemption, and that's do away with them.
Right.
If we were to follow the doctrine of the founders, we wouldn't even be talking about exemptions. And we do need exemptions if that's what we have to have, but as far as I'm concerned. Well, you know, I don't know if you know this, but executive agencies in government, they're all in the executive branch, you know, all those alphabet agencies. They do what they call, they write rules and regulations, and they publish them in the Federal Register. And if Congress does not call for a hearing on them, they automatically become law after 90 days. Do you know that? These things are just pouring out of Washington. And we have the same problem here in the state of Arizona. We have a state register, and executive agencies in the state write rules and regulations. You get a copy of this; they're all online. Hardly anybody cares about them. But if the AG doesn't call them unconstitutional, or if our state legislature doesn't say, "Hey, wait a minute, we need a hearing on this," they automatically become law after 90 days. And that has been sustained by the Supreme Court. At least the previous Supreme Court. I'm not sure the present Supreme Court would sustain that. But, yeah, that's what happens. Yeah.
Do you feel the Supreme Court should take this case? Because we're worried that if this becomes precedence, moving forward in 10 years, what's to say they're not going to mandate something else on it?
I believe if the present Supreme Court, hopefully, I think they're more than ever qualified to do this. If this came before them, they would say that kind of an executive order is unconstitutional. It's not law, and you cannot do it. I think they would, but well, the Supreme Court has upheld the right of a business owner to set whatever conditions they want to. And any private business can do that. And that's what they upheld. But of course, you've got big companies like this who are part of the military defense program that survive because of these contracts, and so they're under the gun of the federal government. Yeah. Any other question, comment?
What would you recommend reading to help people understand? I'm going to use 5,000 years with my kids.
Oh, good for you.
So that's a great book. The other book recommendations to help people understand about the
The first book that I recommend when people ask, what book would you recommend first to read? The primer on good government is the 5,000-year lead. I preached that throughout the whole. Matter of fact, I was in the Chicago airport a few months ago changing planes, and that's a busy airport. Somebody came up to me and pulled me by the shoulder, and he looked at me and he said, I recognize you from somewhere. You're the 5,000-year lead guy. And we're trying to flood this nation with that book because it is marvelous. Okay. Anyway, that's the one I'd recommend. I don't have any here, but
It's on Amazon, like for $10.
well,
And
Jesse, if you want to coordinate here, I can get them to you for $5.
oh, that would be great.
So anyway,
Yeah. I'd like to distribute that to my entire family.
okay. Tell me how many you need, Jesse, and I'll get it for you. other questions? Well, the Supreme Court would have to clip the wings of executive agencies, which they really ought to do. You can't just write a rule and regulations and publish it in the Federal Register and say it's law. See, now, if you take somebody like Clarence Thomas or some of the other recent ones that are pretty good constitutionalists, they would stand up for that. My hope is that if we can get it before the Supreme Court, but that takes an effort, it takes a lot of money, and it takes time to get these things before the Supreme Court because they have to go through it with the channel.
What's your view on Supreme Court packing? There's been a lot of discussion about that.
You know that the founders started with 5 members of the Supreme Court. Now, of course, there's 9. And it's pretty evident to most people, the packing thing. Did you know that FDR wanted to pack the court? He couldn't get his way in a lot of things until the Supreme Court changed. They kept slapping him down. He got so mad at the Supreme Court, this is back in the 30s, that he wanted to pack the court with 15 members. Of course, he would appoint the rest of them and then he'd get his way. But Congress never did go along with it. I mean, it's like anything else, folks. We can destroy this beautiful Constitution if you're not aware and if you don't know what's happening. Anything else?
In what way can we stop this OSHA thing?
Well, what way can we stop this OSHA thing? As I said, Jefferson says the only true correction of constitutional abuses is education. That's a long process. But the first thing we ought to do is make sure we're in touch with our representatives. Everybody from Kristen Simona and Kelly down through, hopefully, the little better ones. But they need to hear from us.
Shit back.
Loud and clear.
They sent me form letters back.
Really?
Yeah.
Find out who your local representatives are. They'll help you figure out what to do to get your voice heard.
Yeah, that's good. You also ought to be involved in your party politics. Both parties are hungry for leadership. You can walk into a party, become a precinct committeeman, and go right into leadership if you want. They're that hungry for leaders, and we need good leaders who understand good principles. Because you have to work through parties. The founders didn't like parties. They spoke against them, but we have them. That's how we have to do it. And so let's work through them. Yes. No? Okay. Okay. No, thank goodness the House of Representatives has 2-year terms. Nobody. People think that the Supreme Court justices are in for life, but that's not what the Constitution says. It says they're in for good behavior. Of course, you know. Pelosi is elected every 2 years in her district in San Francisco. Now you know why. She's being re-elected. And she has a lot of power, so they want power in San Francisco. And she brings a lot of money into their district because of her power. So they keep electing her. Anyway, anything else? Thank you, everybody. Good luck to you.